entry number 101 of the ATF FOIA. I'm going to read this. Between 1984 and 1986, Sweat set fire to a row house located at either 6163, 65, or 67 Quincy Place, Northwest DC. Sweat informed that he poured gasoline under the front door of the house and placed a towel by the door and lit it on fire. Sweat additionally provided that he observed a man walking from the bus stop and followed him to his house. Sweat was driving, redacted, and parked on First Street and walked towards the man. Without being detected, Sweat watched the man enter his residence and then set fire to the house. Sweat recalls driving past the fire many times and remembers seeing occupants jump out windows of the house and heard a man calling for help in the basement. Sweat recalls reading newspaper clippings about the fire, which revealed that Roy Peacock and his wife died in the fire. This fire occurred in the wintertime and the early morning hours. Sweat requested that his attorney's investigators research this fire, but to date was unsuccessful in finding any documents. It is noted that a preliminary investigation conducted by MPDC reveals that a homicide did occur at this location as a result of the fire. This is Arson. I'm Cara McGuirk-Allison. This entry of the ATF Sweat case file describes the fire that killed Bessie Mae Duncan and Roy Pikett. It was January 11th, 1985. I spoke with their son Rodney, who survived the fire along with his siblings.
My sisters, they suffered burns. Martha Faye, maybe not so much, maybe 30 to 40, I'm guessing. I've seen her since, and Cheryl might be along that 50%. That's tough for a girl, and here we are, the two boys were downstairs.
Right. So they were teenagers too, I'm assuming.
Yeah, but we're talking like 19.
So, in the official fire report, an investigator assigned a cause, and I'm going to quote this. This is from that article. He said, "The fire started as a result of a carelessly dropped cigarette in the bedding of a second-floor bedroom." What'd you think about that?
Like, I thought he was misrepresenting what had happened. He didn't know what he was talking about. It was a bogus finding. That's what 100%. I knew that. And slipshotty work, having little or no interest, in this family. Just want to, people want to close cases. Civil servants want to close cases. But that was like pouring salt in the wound, insult to injury. It really was to do that. And the ruling was made in the next, not even the next day, that same day's print of the Washington Post. He hadn't even given it. There wasn't even it was almost like a cursory investigation. We spoke to a couple people. This is what we think it is. And they were given that interview by me, and they just decided this is where they're going to go with it because they don't want to put the time into it. Yeah. I mean, even a half-hearted investigation would have turned up something more than that, but that's what they ruled it as. I looked at the fire report this morning.
Oh, wow, you still have it.
I called Mariah. I was gonna say, Mariah, maybe you can do this next day, or maybe I can go, chill for a little bit or something. I was like, I don't know if I want to. I thought about it. I'm reading this and what a scumbag move, what he did. But that's what he wrote. And listen, the guy lived to collect his pension, and I'm sure his family is fully intact. But that's what he wrote. And he was never held to account for it. The next day, it really was. You feel like a real betrayal, just a letdown. These guys are the professionals. You trust, hey, I'm talking to a professional. He knows what he's doing.
Did anybody in your family smoke?
Bessie Mae Duncan stopped smoking, and my father was a cigar smoker. And as you know, cigar smokers don't smoke in bed. It's something when you're out socializing, you're having a cocktail or something, and a cigar.
Right.
You don't break open a pack of cigars and start smoking them like chain smoking.
Reporter Dave Jamieson was with the Washington City paper at the time and had the fire beat. He's the one who pieced together that the fire on Quincy was a result of the arsonist and not from a flicked cigarette as the family had been told. Rodney had a copy of the report when we spoke.
Yeah, it's dated the 11th.
Same day.
And it's Captain Richard L. Clark. And his report, I don't know, maybe Dave gave this to me. He writes, well, he certainly takes himself and the fire department off the hook because there were no smoke detectors found. And he writes, carelessly dropped cigarette in the bedding of the second floor bedroom. Like, yeah, you have the report. The paper said improperly discarded smoking materials. Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, and just to show how lazy that is, we now know, the fire was started at the front door. Reporter Dave Jamieson.
I came to town in the summer of 2003. I was, kind of trying to break into journalism. I'd moved from New Jersey, which is where I'm from, where I'd been working as a fact checker, and I got an internship at Washington City paper in that summer of 2003, which is when a lot of these fires were going on. And sort of coincidentally, my editor, Eric Wemple, who's at the Washington Post now, he had decided that we should write a lot about fires at the paper. And it sort of, the idea was, well, one, fires have their inherent narrative, right? Things happen in them. They're, I think, inherently interesting, and they tell a story. And he thought it was also just a good oblique way to write about poverty too, because fires, tend to happen in poor neighborhoods. So he thought it was an interesting way to get in there. And so what I did and some other interns at the time did as well, was take a look at the fires that happened that week. And I would hop in my car and drive around and try to talk to people about what had happened. And there'd usually be some kind of fire a day to go check out. And I would try to find the most interesting one I could and write about it, interview the people who were there. And some of these would turn out to be fires that Tom had set. And so later, after his sentencing, of course, I was just fascinated with his case, and I saw, like everybody else, that we knew by then that there were publicly that this guy had set hundreds. The authorities had disclosed that, but they didn't say anything about his motives.
Dave began a correspondence with Sweat. It all started with writing him a letter. So, do you remember what you said in that first letter and how fast he responded?
Yeah, it was just a straightforward letter that's kind of similar to the ones I would always write to people in that situation. It was just like, I followed your case. I'm interested in your side of the story. Maybe we can discuss it a bit. It was something pretty simple and straightforward. And I think, I made clear that I reported on his fires. And so I think that probably helped with him in terms of being open to some kind of communication with me, just knowing that we had a mutual interest here, which is fires, right?
Yeah.
So he wrote back very quickly, said that he appreciated the letter and maybe this could be the beginning of something, and it definitely was. The story came out about a year and a half after we first touched base. I think my letter started getting returned to me probably a few months before the story ran. Mm-hmm. They put him on restricted correspondence. So, we traded letters for several months, maybe even a year.
And do you know why they put him on the restricted correspondence?
I don't know.
Dave wrote an award-winning article in the Washington City paper called Letters from an Arsonist. He chronicled many of the fires and shared Sweat's inside knowledge, motivations, and urges.
That could take hours to unpack.
Mm-hmm.
First, just from the perspective of a guy you meet at work or out on the street is, I would say he was a nice guy, nice, soft-spoken guy. Everybody I spoke to about him always said he was extremely friendly, caring, and hardworking, worked very hard at his job. But underneath all of that, he had lots of anxieties and a sense of failure and kind of a sense of not belonging. And a lot of that, as he told me, went back to childhood. He never really felt like he fit in. I think maybe part of that was, being gay and what sounds like a pretty religious family growing up. But he also he had what he knew were not totally common fantasies about sexual fantasies, about shoes and uniforms and things like that. And so, he harbored a lot of sexual fantasies that he kind of, that had a violent outlet for him. And he was living this double life where he was this sort of nice guy who showed up every day at KFC and did his job really well and was proud of the work, even though he felt like it didn't make other people proud in his life. But there was this other guy who kind of never reconciled his violent urges and these fantasies he had. And so, I think he was pretty tormented by all of that.
Do you think he was, and this might not be the right terminology, but do you think he was in some way relieved when he was finally caught?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he told me he was relieved. This had gone on for 2 decades, and I think he was exhausted by all of it.
Right.
He had a sense of relief as he drove around with the investigators, going over all the fires that he'd set. I think he was just tired. He was tired, and on some level, he was happy to get caught. He didn't put up a fight with them for very long, as I'm sure they can tell you.
Yeah.
And he enjoyed. I think he enjoyed the connection with some investigators who operate in his world and were interested in his mind.
One of the fires Sweat discussed with Dave was the Quincy Place fire.
And it involved a death. And he called it the Roy Peacock fire. I knew this fire could be a big deal in his case because obviously there was a fatality. And it happened years and years earlier, so it wasn't something that people were talking about. But I as soon as he said that somebody died as a result of this fire, I knew that I had to figure out what this fire was. And it was difficult because he didn't provide the correct name, Roy Peacock. There was no record of any fire involving a Roy Peacock. I was trying to get investigators to tell me about this fire. They couldn't do it. As I recall, it was, part of a plea. They were not at liberty to discuss a fire like this. And so, I was kind of left to my own and having to do basically searches through old news clips, trying to figure out what this fire was. And it took a while, and I'm sure, probably being on Quincy Street, that turning out to be correct. That's probably what led me to an old Washington Post story about this fire, and it involved a guy named Roy Pickett. And I realized that Tom had probably done a phonetic spelling. Surely he had read that Post story, and as I learned, he followed the aftermath of this story closely. And so, once I realized that Tom had essentially confessed to setting this fire, I was basically wondering if the family even knew that it had been him.
Because the family had been originally told that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it was suspected that Roy, the father, had flicked a lit cigarette on the second floor, right?
That's right. Yeah, the and I did obtain if I recall, from the fire department, I did get a copy of the case file from the fire, and it was pinned on, basically careless smoking, which I'm sure many fires were attributed to back then, probably whether or not that was the actual cause.
Right.
I decided to go to the family, and I think it took some tracking down to do probably some nexus work to figure out the people who had lived in that house and where they were. And, I tracked down, I guess it would be Rodney and Cheryl were in New York, near in Nyack, New York, or around there. And, I was able to get Rodney on the phone. And I did realize that, it was the same family from the Quincy Place fire. And, I told them that, I've learned a lot about what happened there. Could I meet with you, to explain it? And then we decided to get together, up in Nyack.
So where did you meet?
We met at a mall up there, shopping mall. That was their, where they wanted to meet.
Yep. And had they both been physically affected by the fire? Were they burned?
Cheryl was. I don't know about Rodney, but Cheryl, I could see it on Cheryl. I could still see the burns on her arms.
So you drive up to New York, you're meeting them, I'm assuming like a food court in a mall, someplace public, right? And what do you do? Do you bring out the letter from Sweat? How do you break this news to this family?
Yeah, it was very difficult. And so, we sat down and I just kind of explained my communications with Tom and told him I had a letter that I believed was a confession to the fire that changed their lives. And so I gave him a copy of it and let him read it. And I remember Rodney made a couple phone calls to square up details of relatives, and by the end of that, yeah, they were convinced that this was that Tom was talking about their fire. Oh, another thing, you may want to look into, and this bothered the hell out of me. They didn't reclassify that goddamn fire until 2 years ago.
What do you mean?
The picket fire. They didn't.
Oh, right.
I wrote I put the story out there with all this, and DC, MPD, did not until literally 2 years ago. I think that other guy wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
It was only after that they reclassified it as a homicide.
Uh-huh.
So, that bothered me, that it took them so long to do that.
So here's the weird thing, right? In 2018, just 3 years ago, DC Fire finally classifies your home fire as homicides.
Do you have that?
Yes.
Can you?
I will send that to you.
Your email, please.
Yes.
They did in 2018.
Let me. Do I have it here?
Not now, but just.
But I can read it for you from the Washington Post. But so Peter Newsham was the fire. Yeah, so in 2018. So the fires have been officially, that fire has been officially declared as homicides.
That's 33 years later.
How's that make you feel?
Listen, there's closure. I feel a sense of relief, but it's a long time coming. Again, but it's always about this sense of betrayal, though. You lose people you love, you lose property, and then the very same people you expect to thoroughly investigate it and come up with answers. And if they find it was criminality, then they would go and arrest the guy. Shit can. It's a turnoff. And it can skew your view of the real hard-working guys, the guys who really, where I live, they'll go and they'll search. They want to find there's criminality afoot, but apparently maybe it's just a DC thing. I'm thinking, I shouldn't go this way and think that they're just these fire investigators are full of it, but that one was tough to hear. But now there's that vindication. They say now you can say, wait, we weren't, my parents weren't careless and caused their own demise. Their actions contribute to their own demise, and that's basically essentially what they were saying. Oh, careless, too bad. Oh well, it's right into that file. I'm happy to hear that. I'd like to see it in writing.
I'll send you actually, hold on one second. It's like literally right next to me. Hold on. So this is a printed copy, but this is from the Washington Post. So, and if you can read it, it's dated March 5th, 2018. Fire deaths in DC ruled accidental 3 decades ago, reclassified as homicides.
How ironic, March 5th. The date of death.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that one?
Right. Entry number 100 in the ATF report. Quote, between 1984 and 1986, Sweat informed investigators that he had set fire to an apartment building at 200 P Street, Northwest DC. Sweat informed that he poured gasoline in front of a door in the hallway of the lower level floor. He further informed that there were a pair of work boots by the door and that the fire occurred between 1 and 2 a.m. Additionally, Sweat was driving, redacted, at the time of the fire and left the scene and returned shortly thereafter, parked the car, and went into the crowd to observe the fire. Sweat recalls seeing one man brought out on a stretcher with his knees bent in his underwear and believed that he was deceased. Sweat also believes that a baby was burned in the fire, and one additional person also received injuries. Sweat recalls the fire occurring in the wintertime. We found the article mentioning this fire in the Washington Post. It was dated December 24th, 1984, and it reads, Northwest fire injures 4. 4 persons, including a 5-month-old infant, were seriously injured yesterday in a fire in a small Northwest Washington apartment building, DC fire officials reported. They said the blaze broke out shortly after 5 a.m. in the building at 200 P Street Northwest and was apparently caused by careless smoking. Damage was estimated at $8,000. The 3 adults, Jerry Glenn Sr., 53, Jerry Glenn Jr., 19, and Elizabeth Hussey, 62, were listed in serious condition last night at the Washington Hospital Center. The infant, whose name was not released, was in serious condition at Children's Hospital, officials said. This fire was set 19 days before the Quincy Place fire that took the lives of Rodney Pikett's father and stepmother and badly injured his siblings. We did not find an obituary for the Glens or Miss Hussey from 1984. We attempted to locate them, but were unable to find them as of this recording. Investigators were unsure if the family was ever told their fire was started by Thomas Sweat and not careless smoking. On September 12, 2005, Thomas Sweat was sentenced in U.S. District Court, Greenbelt, Maryland. There are 11 counts that require concurrent sentences. He was also charged with first-degree murder while armed for Mamalou Jones and second-degree murder while armed for Annie Brown. He was sentenced to life plus 135 years and 10 months and is currently serving his sentence in a medium-security prison in Virginia. Repeated requests to the Federal Bureau of Prisons to allow an interview have been denied, citing COVID outbreaks at the prison. Sweat and I exchanged a few emails until COVID restrictions took away his computer allowance. A few handwritten letters from Sweat were mailed to my P.O. box. And most recently, we returned to email as I updated him on the progress of this podcast and my hope to still speak with him. The notes were always brief. So one dated September 11th, 2020. Hi, Cara. Just a note to say thanks for your letter, and I look forward to hearing from you real soon. Have a nice evening, Tom. He asked me for money to pay for the computer usage. They're charged per minute. I sent him $50. He said, quote, "I have other contacts and they are very supportive with sending funds. It's just the way it is, and I look forward to starting this wonderful experience with you and my old friends." 4 exclamation marks and the word smile. The next day he wrote again, quote, "Just a thought that crossed my mind. It was 15 years ago today that I sat in that Greenbelt courthouse listening to that judge said those strong words, 'Mr. Sweat, you will never be able to harm anybody again.' And the look of the ATF team, a moment frozen in time." I have 5 handwritten letters from Sweat. They talk about the dark days of COVID. He told me more about his motives. Quote, "It was the adrenaline of watching it burn, smell the smoke, and the person or who the owner was. Sex and fires for me or a pair. And most times, the sex drove me to set a fire. If I drove past a house and there were boots like combat boots on the porch, that would give me the urge to come back that night or early morning, because I knew there was a man who lived in that house. If it's a hot rod SUV that has big spurty rims and treated windows parked in the driveway, it's a reason to come back and burn it, to record and add it to my list of fires." He continues, "You will find through the course of our communication that just like fire, I have this fascination for the military. Always have and always will. Even in this prison, more are ex-servicemen who are CO. It's comfort to be around them, to see them walk, talk, and still have the soldier, Marine characteristics about them. This is just a list of some military who came to my apartment for an interview." He then lists 3 years, 1998, 2003, and 2004, and 3 names and ranks of men. And then he asks me, "It would be nice if you have the time to look these men up and find out where they are after so many years. Just a thought if you don't mind." Then he says, "Okay, enough of this foolishness," smiley face. Gosh. After about a year of not corresponding, I emailed him to let him know the podcast was happening and that I was finishing up my interviews and seeing Frank Molino the following weekend. Sweat asked me for Frank's address. He also asked me to send more money. I replied that I had already sent him the $50, to which he said, quote, "Cara, I'm famous and I don't glorify what I did, but you need to be reminded that if you wish to have any dealings with me, with this arsonist, you must, and I repeat, you must spend bread or don't email me anymore. Do I make myself clear? 2 question marks. I have something you're seeking and it's not free. 3 exclamation points. Goodbye." Two years after starting this podcast, I found out that my next door neighbor, whose backyard literally connects to mine, who keeps a meticulous garden and has family karaoke nights, was a fire investigator for Prince George's County.
I was in charge of fire prevention and investigations. So I was the fire marshal, and I was overseeing both the prevention and investigative side of the fire department.
Victor Stagnaro walked over on a warm fall day to talk to me on my back deck. He had a first-hand view of what it was like to work in the communities that were attacked by Sweat.
They were on edge. Yeah, there was a lot of concern. We put out a lot of information on, keeping your porch lights on and having motion lights just to kind of maybe steer people away from your particular front porch. And that really applied a lot of pressure on the task force and all of us to really try to resolve this as quickly as we could. Obviously, from an investigative standpoint, it wasn't simple. But it was strenuous. There was a lot of stress on a lot of us and the community, rightfully so.
I asked Victor what he thought of the task force members.
They're good people. They're highly vetted. By the time they get to an investigations, that's kind of an elite group of within the fire service. I almost hate to say that because you don't want to get their heads too big, but it is. There's a science to it. It requires a lot of skill, a lot of dedication to it. we had there was a fire investigator. He's passed away now. Gosh, I can't believe he was from Boston. He had a great Boston accent. And he used to say, to do this job, you got to have heart. You got to have heart. And it's so true. I mean, your heart has to be into it. And really, your heart has to be in it if you're going to be a fire investigator, because it required what those folks dedicated themselves to was, once there was an arsonist to be caught, you just had to be tireless and put a lot of effort into it. And it's a family ordeal. It's a family event. It takes the entire family to support a fire investigator.
I worked on arson for over 2 years, just a little longer than the task force spent hunting down Thomas Sweat. COVID threw a wrench into production, but everyone was incredibly gracious, offering their time and stories, doing interviews over the computer or wearing masks. We made it happen. I lived and worked in D.C. at the time of the investigation and really thought I knew the story, but I didn't know the half of it. For me, it all started one fall day with my own ride-along led by Tom Daly.
What else, ma'am? Any other place you want to see?
Not that I can think of. This was very amazing and thorough. I appreciate it so much.
You're welcome.
It just really...
Happy to help.
Now it's my job to translate what I'm seeing into audio. That's what...
Make sense of the senseless?
Yes. But it also helps me realize, again, trying to tell your story, what level of involvement. There's a reason that these roads are imprinted in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah, we were flying blind. Doing this, we could do it. Finding out what his name was, didn't have it.
Right.
Did not have the ability to find that out. We could do what you and I are doing right now, every day, and that's what we did. And we worked at. But, the other part of the puzzle, it wasn't there.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Do you love what you do?
I don't do it anymore.
Did?
Loved it. Truly loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. Does it sound like I did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't a job. There was days it was a job, but it was never a job. It was enormously exciting. It was a wonderful career. I worked with wonderful people, and I did love it. It was so goddamn interesting to me. It was so interesting. Well, what I liked about it, everybody's like, why did you like it so much? I said, it was life. It was just real life shit.
Yep.
Some of it was murder and mayhem and drugs and guns and all that stuff, but it was real life stuff. It was live action. There was nothing theoretical. There was nothing theoretical about it. It was cool. I just liked it. And you have to have a passion for it. I did. I thought I did.
Arson is brought to you by the International Association of Arson Investigators in cooperation with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Our executive producer is Scott Stevens. Our editor is Tracy Wall. Arson is produced by Platform Media with help from Emily Vaughn and Mariah Dennis. Engineering assistance from Andrew Chadwick. Our theme music is by The Last Knife Fighter and additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Additional thanks to Vicky Bendour, Eric Longnecker, Michael Knight, Ed Bice, John Allen, Lou Eliopoulos, Rhonda Traherne, Stephen Patrick, and Jonathan Reif. For more information about this case, you can go to IAAIarson.com for evidence pictures and the map of the fires. This has been Arson. I'm Cara McGuirk-Allison.